Alright, what's going on everyone? The release of Tarkir Dragonstorm is nearly upon us. Actually, it was like a week ago. I'm a bit late this time, but there are 5 new commander decks. The purpose of this video is just to give a brief overview of the decks. There's 5 decks. There's 500 cards, so just consider this an overview of the deck's core strategies so you can decide which deck is best for you, and there will be links to the complete deck list in the description below. So let's start with Abzan Armor, a white, black, and green deck that cares about high toughness and defender. The first commander is Felithar the Steadfast, a 4-mana 0/5 that will make creatures you control assign combat damage with their toughness, making this a 5/5 essentially. It also turns off defender, allowing defenders to attack, and finally you can sacrifice a creature to draw cards equal to its toughness, which should be very high, and then you have to discard cards equal to its power, which in this deck should be very low. So if you combine this card with Indomitable Ancients, for example, you have a 4-mana 10/10 that can be sacrificed to draw 10 and discard 2. The backup commander is Baator Ancestor's Voice, a 5-mana 3/5 with flying and lifelink, which can distribute counters at the end of turn based on the amount of life you gained, and can reanimate creatures from the graveyard based on how much life you lost. This is fine, but without question the deck is built around Felithar. So this deck is filled with big butts, from low-end creatures like a Boreal Grazer, Wall of Omens, and Wall of Roots, to top-end threats like the Silver Quill Dragon, Dragonlord Dramoka, Zatopa, just huge things that get even bigger if you have your commander. Not to mention, there's lots of things with very scary high toughness, like Tree of Redemption and the Indomitable Ancients we mentioned earlier, which become kind of terrifying when your commander is on the field. Some new cards for this archetype that are exclusive to this deck include things like Jaws of Defeat, which will make people lose a lot of life when you play high toughness creatures, Canopy Gargantuan, which distributes a ton of +1/+1 counters based on the toughness of your creatures, and Reunion of the House, which can basically reanimate your entire graveyard since most of your creatures have low power. There's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. I have to be brief here because there's 5 decks, but there's more high toughness creatures, there's more high toughness payoffs, there's more brand new cards unique to this deck, but basically if you like big butts and you cannot lie, be sure to check out Abzan Armor. Next up we have Temur Roar, a green, blue, and red deck that cares about casting dragons with lots of tribal support for that creature type, as well as caring about creatures with power 4 or greater, which dragons usually have. The first commander is Eshki, who focuses on the power 4 or greater aspect of the deck. She'll get a +1/+1 counter whenever you cast a dragon, which you'll have a ton of. You draw a card if that creature had power 4 or greater, and then if it had 6 power, she'll deal damage equal to her power to all of your opponents. So the bigger she gets and the bigger stuff you play, the more damage you deal to everyone. That's the idea. And then on the dragon side of things, we have Urani. Boy, I really have a hard time not pronouncing this. Urani. Look, it's a 7-mana 7/7 with flying and trample that when it enters or attacks, you look at the top 8 cards of your library and you put a dragon from among them straight onto the battlefield. So that as an enter the battlefield effect from the command zone is pretty good. And if you get to attack with it, I mean, that's a lot of free power. So both of these commanders actually make a lot of sense for this deck. I feel like most people are going to choose the dragon, but actually both of these are totally reasonable for what this deck is trying to do. So naturally, the deck has a ton of dragons. I can't even begin to cover them all, but suffice it to say, dragons, big ones, lots of them. You're gonna have dragons. In terms of tribal support, you have everything from cost reduction, as with Dragonlord Servant, Nagi, Draco Zealot, and Sarkhan Soul of Flame, all of which make your expensive dragons easier to cast. And then you have top-end payoffs like Lathless, Atarka, and Bloodcaller Scourge. That last one, by the way, is a new card that will let you put dragons from your hand onto the battlefield for free. As far as the Power Matters theme goes, you have things like Temur Ascendancy and Elemental Bond, both of which draw cards if you control a big creature. Now this might not seem like a lot of support for this theme, but that's because WotC pumped this deck full of brand new cards that care about power, stuff like Thunder Mane Dragon, which can cast big creatures off the top of the library, Deceptive Frostkite, which can become a copy of creatures with power 4 or greater, and become the Avalanche, which will draw for each big creature you have, and then give your creatures +X, where X is the number of cards in your hand after you draw. And there's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. There's more dragons, there's more dragon payoffs, there's new cards we didn't talk about, and did I mention dragons? It's a dragon deck. If you like dragons, check out Temur Roar. Next up is Mardu Surge, a red, white, and black deck that likes to go wide with tokens during the combat phase, but also likes to sacrifice those tokens for value, and that's because the face commander is Zurgo, who has Mobilize. So he's a 3-mana 3/3 with Mobilize 1, meaning when he attacks, you get a free 1/1 token tapped and attacking. However, Mobilize forces you to sacrifice that token at end of turn. However, this deck is filled with lots of sacrifice, death matters type of things to synergize with Mobilize. As you see with the next ability, whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, you draw a card if it was attacking, or each opponent loses 1 if it wasn't. And that's like the whole basis of the deck. The alternate commander is Nariv, Crackling Vanguard, a 5-mana 4/4 flyer with Death Touch that makes 2 1/1 goblins, so fits right in. And when it attacks, you can exile a number of cards off the top of your library equal to the number of differently named tokens you control. And then you can cast them, not for free, but you can cast them any turn that you've attacked with your commander. So yeah, the deck is filled with token producers like Adeline, Legion War Boss, Mirror Battlesphere. Not only do these produce tokens, but they also incentivize you to attack. And speaking of being encouraged to attack, you have things like Ogre Battle Driver, Angel of Invention, Hero of Bladehold. All of these pump your board, and the last two make even more tokens, right? Tokens, pump. But what about when they die? Well, you have things like Bastion of Remembrance, Aaron, Benalia's Ruin, and Twilight Drover. The first makes more tokens, or one of them, and drains the table whenever they die, and the other two basically turn dying tokens into permanent +1/+1 counters. So new cards for this archetype include a Nog Strike Leader, which makes tokens when you attack with it, or your commander, and it can sacrifice itself to give all your tokens indestructible. Within range, makes a couple of 1/1s, and then will make people lose life when you attack them, and Redoubled Storm Singer, which it makes tapped and attacking token copies of every token you've created this turn, which is kind of scary because you have ways to make like token copies of Mirror Battlesphere and look, the point is there's tokens going wide, tokens aggro. There's more token producers, there's more aggro stuff, there's more new cards we didn't talk about, but basically, if you want to go wide while reaping the benefits of all your tokens dying, Mardu Surge might be the deck for you. Next up is Sultai Arisen, a black, green, and blue deck focused on self-mill and graveyard synergies, and that might sound familiar, but what makes this deck unique is it really focuses on just cards leaving the graveyard, also has a bit of a landfall theme, a little bit. The first commander is Kotis Sibsig Champion, a 3-mana 3/3 that will let you cast creatures from your graveyard by exiling 3 cards in addition to its cost. So if you have 4 cards, you could just cast a creature, exile the other ones. He will also get 2 +1/+1 counters whenever a creature enters from the graveyard. So very clear here, you want to fill your graveyard and just cast from it. You also get Taval, a 4-mana 4/4 flyer that will mill 3 when it attacks, then return a land from the graveyard to the battlefield. That's going to really lean into that landfall theme. It also makes 2/2 zombies whenever 1 or more cards leave the graveyard. And this is important because it only cares about stuff leaving. So not only does that count for reanimating like you would expect, but if you exile cards with Delve, for example, it's going to see that and make a 2/2. It just cares about things leaving the graveyard regardless of why it's happening. So naturally, you'll be self-milling early with things like Stitcher Supplier, Satyr Wayfinder, Grizzly Salvage, all of which can just quickly fill your graveyard. Your graveyard is a resource, it's like an extra hand almost. So in a way, Stitcher Supplier is like 1 mana draw 3, and it's not quite, but it's kind of. And the payoffs include things like Lord of Extinction, Multani, Living Death. The first 2 get huge, and the spell is a mass reanimate sort of. It wipes the board, then brings everyone's graveyards back, and typically you want to have the biggest graveyard, so that's how that works. And you have some big ones that you can reanimate. You have things like Consuming Aberration, Avenger of Zendikar, there's that landfall thing again, and Colossal Grave Reaver. This is a new one. It mills 3 when it enters or attacks, and then says whenever 1 or more creatures enter your graveyard from your library, so whenever you mill, you get to just put 1 on the battlefield for free, no cost. So it's going to mill 3 if you hit a creature straight onto the battlefield, but that's going to count for all your other milling too, and it triggers on attack. It's a pretty powerful new card for the archetype, and there's a lot of powerful new cards for this archetype. You have like Floral Invoker, which is just like a card advantage engine, allowing you to discard reanimation targets while also returning lands to trigger your commander and the landfall stuff. Welcome the Dead can make a bunch of zombies while drawing and discarding, and the flashback will once again trigger your commander because it's a card leaving the graveyard. And Afterlife from the Loam is a mass reanimation spell, getting a creature back from each player's graveyard that also has Delve. So once again, when you delve and remove stuff from your graveyard, that's going to count for your commander. And that's the whole idea of the deck. There's lots of ways to mill. There's lots of payoffs for having a big graveyard. The deck is very good at returning lands from the graveyard either to battlefield or to your hand. So it has a bunch of landfall stuff as well. And it has some new cards that we didn't have time to talk about. But basically, if you're interested in a Sultai graveyard deck that isn't like laser focused on one specific strategy, right? Normally you think of like reanimation or just caring about graveyard size. In this case, it has more like broad and diverse payoffs for self-milling with a little interesting landfall sub-theme because of all the lands it can get back. So if that sounds interesting, check out Sultai Arisen. And our final deck is Jeskai Striker, a blue, red, and white deck built around the Flurry mechanic, which is to say that it wants you to cast 2 spells per turn. The first commander is Shiko Narset Unified, a 4 mana 4/4 with flying and vigilance that will copy the second spell you play each turn, so long as it targets. It has to target a creature or player, then you can copy it. However, if the second thing you play doesn't target, you still get to draw, so it's still good either way. The second commander is Elsha Threefold Master, a 3 mana 1/1, one of the worst bodies so far, until you read that it has Trample and Prowess, that when it deals combat damage to a player, it's going to create that many 1/1 monks with Prowess. So this wants you to play a bunch of spells, make this huge with Prowess, and then just fill a board with a bunch of monks that also have prowess. Kind of terrifying, to be honest. So first off, as you might expect, the deck is absolutely chock full of spells that draw cards. You want to sling spells, so you need to constantly have spells to cast, and the best way to do that is to play spells that replace themselves with more spells. So lots of drawing, lots of filtering. So this is pretty much what you would expect. However, if you're playing Shiko and Narset, this wants to copy your second spell each turn. Most spell slinging decks are like Elsha. They want you to cast like 5-10 spells in a turn if you can, right? They want you to go crazy. Shiko and Narset, not necessarily. They just want you to cast 2 per turn, and then copy the second one. So this actually has a ton of big spells that you want to be your second spell to cast a copy of, like Expansion Explosion, Sublime Epiphany, and Magma Opus, which also works as ramp. These are all powerful effects. Even the Epiphany might not seem that big, but when you get 2 of them, it's kind of ridiculous actually. And the idea is you want to copy these by being the second spell you play after like an opt, right? You want your commander in play, and then you want to play opt and Magma Opus, and then kaboom, right? That's the idea. New cards for this archetype include things like Aligned Heart, which will get a rally counter every time you cast 2 spells in a turn, which is what you're doing already. And then it's going to make a 1/1 Prowess Monk for each rally counter. So the longer the game goes on, the more powerful this gets. Transcendent Dragon is a flash creature that counters a spell, then lets you cast the thing that it counters, which would be 2 spells, right? You cast the dragon, then you cast the spell, and that's going to trigger your commander. And Caldera Pyre Maul Maul, which gets a +1/+1 counter every time you cast an instant or sorcery, which is already pretty good, and then it deals damage equal to its power to target opponent. So you could like one-shot someone if you could just chain a bunch of cheap draw spells together. That's pretty cool. There is, of course, plenty more powerful spells that we don't have time to talk about. There's a lot of powerful spell payoffs, from creatures that get bigger based on the number of spells in your graveyard to ones that let you recast spells, right? Lots of creatures in this deck that just care about spell casting, and there's plenty of new cards to power up these Jeskai spell slinging decks. So if you want to play Jeskai spells where you can kind of pick and choose, you can pick Elsha and you can go the traditional, try to play a bunch of spells in a turn. But if you want to play a spell deck that feels a little bit different, you can play Shiko and Narset and mostly just care about casting 2 per turn and copying a big spell. If that sounds interesting to you, check out Jeskai Strikers. And that is it for the Tarkir Dragonstorm Commander decks. I will leave links to the complete deck lists in the description below, as well as sponsored Amazon affiliate links, which I discourage you from using if you have a local game store. I also fully expect everyone to just already know about these decks, but I was late this time around. I'm sorry. Whoops, it kind of slipped by and I didn't realize how late it had gotten, but here we are. So those are the decks. Be sure to let me know which deck you are most interested in the comments. But in the meantime, guys, thanks for watching. I hope this was useful, even if it was late, and I will see you in the next one.